Goedemiddag and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to what is already the 5th edition of our Dutchlink Goes Online interviews. While COVID-19 restrictions are slowly loosening in New South Wales and the majority of us is adjusting to the new normal, I'm sure behind the scenes at UNSW Student Accommodation, the wheels haven't stopped turning. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Ron de Haan, a fellow Hotel School De Hague graduate, although a few years before me, and as we say in Dutch, a fellow hotello. Ron has been working for UNSW since 2015 as a Director of Student Accommodation. He's overseeing a portfolio of over 2,000 purpose-built student accommodation beds, both colleges and independent living. Ron, welcome. Tell us, how are you responding to COVID-19 in your workplace?
Well, I probably first want to thank you for the invitation, of course, and congratulations on this this great initiative. I think in these strange and challenging times, I think we get so engrossed in our own little experiences. So it's really good to hear how other people within Sydney and from this community are coping with it in their own experience. So it's quite refreshing to sometimes step outside. I must admit, I enjoyed listening to some of the other interviews. So thank you very much for that one. So yes, it's been an interesting ride for us at the university. I think we, maybe luckily or unluckily, we got very early on in the process, we got touched by it, that we had a positive student that had arrived from Wuhan on campus. And I think that automatically meant that we very quickly had to go into dealing with, more or less say, the real stuff, because you had physically had somebody who was tested positive. And in those days, I think this would have been probably early, well, it was before the travel ban came in place, so it would have been in late January, that everybody was just totally panicking, and not panicking in a bad way, but so, oh, this is here. How does this all pan out? So we've been dealing with it for a long time, and I think the benefit as well of being part of a university like UNSW is that a lot of people with a lot of experience get pulled together. So from the beginning onwards, it was not that I had to deal with my issues in my workplace and I didn't have any support. There was always that kind of the UNSW, our own health service that looks after students and staff. Then you've got people from the infectious diseases department, but from the university you had. So all these people were brought together, their experiences into an incident management team that very early on started dealing with it. At the same time, of course, we still had the same issues that everybody else had, that the goalpost kept on changing. And as a result, by the time you think you've got a handle on something, it totally changes. Early on, we were looking at planning for the return of more students, and we got stuck already. So it's been a very interesting ride with a lot of changes to the way we run our normal business. But we've been operational throughout. We've had people living with us throughout this period. So we've been a live operation like a lot of businesses, and that has meant that we had to really adapt our practices to a lot of new guidelines.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying that, because one of the questions from the members we have, it was actually Mike Verhoeven, who was wondering, he said, when foreign students are allowed to come to Australia, because I don't think they are at this stage, and they will be allowed to stay at UNSW accommodation again, what provisions will be put in place to monitor their health and safety?
Yeah, I think it's a continuation of what we've been doing, and if you're looking at it, get a couple of examples of it. For example, we've got those residential colleges where students have meals included within their package of living here. So we really had to look at it and say, well, okay, how can we provide meals in a safe manner? So we had to rearrange table settings that you get at 1.5 meter distancing. We had to put crosses on the benches from you can sit here, but you cannot sit there. Normally speaking, they would go up and help themselves for a large part of the menu. Everything was being served to them. Those kind of things. Menus were slightly adjusted that you could do that. We had to look at, instead of, for them, it's their living room, their dining room. So they would come out and sit together. You had to start saying, no, we can only have so many people. So you had to start putting meal times into place, and you had to clean the meals times. You had to clean, and you had to do all those kind of things. We had to start increasing the cleaning. I think Ronald van Wezel mentioned on his one already from the extra touch point cleaning, the lift buttons, the door handles, the handles. So we had to start doing those more often. So there were some environments where and we still are, we really had to control it. So we said, well, you close a common area where students congregate and hang together, and yes, you can monitor it a little bit, but I mean, students, the beings they are, they've got a different clock, normally speaking. They quite often are awake a lot later, and at 11 o'clock at night or midnight, there's nobody from staff to possibly check if there are too many people in the space. So we had to close areas, off. Whereas in other areas where you really live in a smaller apartment with maybe 4 or 5 people, we really rely heavily on students acting properly, by educating them, reminding them what is your hand washing protocol, your personal hygiene, your social distancing, when you go into the kitchen and you cook your meal, because you cook your own meal. If there's people in there, you wait till they're finished and then you go in. And I think the interesting part is that since that time when we had that positive case, which was one that was brought in by somebody arriving, and I have to say at the same time, this girl who came in was probably the most exemplar person to attract COVID, because she did everything right. The moment she came in, she wasn't feeling well. She stayed away from things. She went straight away to the hospital to get tested. She self-isolated straight away. She was having a mask on. She put gloves on when she was coming through common areas until we gave her, she basically got tested positive and got taken straight away to the hospital. And then after she returned, we had to put her up for another couple of weeks. But it was those things where sometimes you just have to rely on people then doing the right things themselves. And I think that the students have learned that very well. I think in response to the question there, I think the challenge for us is going to be that we now have got a cohort of people that are really feel comfortable and safe where they are. And they now, when we start talking about it, they get a bit concerned about, well, how is it going to go? How will it impact on my safe space? I'll feel comfortable. I don't want all these other people around me. So it's going to be a challenging time, but I think it's going to be more for us looking at what are our capacities. So because we've got certain facilities where they've got shared bathrooms. So you've got the old, the dorm style, in the sense that you've got your own bedroom, but then you use shared bathrooms on the corridor. So how can you do that? How many people can you have in those buildings? When you open common areas, how many people can you get in there? So what we'll probably see is that when we start getting that return, we might have to say, well, now our capacity for the first half of 2021, or maybe the whole of 2021, is going to be X number of people less, because we want to keep those areas safe. We want to have, there's a demand from people to say, well, sorry, there was this phone ringing on the side, I want to stop it. Where you say, well, how can we educate them properly that they do this, and how can we keep that safe? And what if there's an outbreak on campus where you get more people returning? Being university accommodation, we'll probably be asked to say, well, how can we put 10, 15, 20 people that have to self-isolate for a period of time because they've been in contact in a study space? So it's going to be...
Looking at all those challenges, because you already went through quite a few, but the biggest challenge will probably be when they all return, because what is the current capacity on campus?
Well, I mean, I think we've got the enrollment numbers, I think, is around about 40,000 students that come in, and some of them are very part-time, but they're massive numbers. So and that's that thing where a university, like any business, and you now hear people talking about it from on programs on TV. So, well, how many people in the office space? How many people in the lift? How many people in the lobby? How do I do it in a kitchenette on the floor from an office? I think here you've got this open space where an office quite often you've got an entry, and you can possibly check at the entry how people are. And you can maybe say, well, we do a temperature check. Well, if you would want to do a temperature check on the campus like UNSW or Sydney or Macquarie, for that matter, or anyone, how do you do that? Because there's probably at least 20 different entrances to a campus. You can't have 20 people standing there checking and whatever. So there's going to be a great reliance on trying strategic measurements, but also have people doing the right thing. That's good.
Yeah, I can imagine there's quite a few lasting effects on the industry. And are you currently finding a way in the new normal? Like, do you think this will be the new normal for UNSW student accommodation?
I think definitely it's always interesting to see what I was. It's interesting. I'll be using the same thing. That there is going to be a new normal. I think you would expect that something like this, with so many million people infected, and we think now the US close to 100,000 people dead, that this will have an impact on the way people act and behave and what they deem as secure and proper. So there will be a new normal. I think the interesting part is that probably for a lot of businesses, it will be that a bit of a catalyst from, well, how do we get used to this one? I think one of the things in my time, and before joining university, I worked in student accommodation already for 10 years before that. And in those periods, you already had this whole thing, online learning, and there was going to be things, and this MOOCs, this massive platform free learning, and everybody was saying it's the end of universities. And it always till now survived, but there was partially, I think from my viewpoint, and that's my viewpoint, it's not the university's position necessarily, but largely it was driven as well because universities like Sydney, UNSW, and the big were always trying to really stress that the value of the benefit of being on campus, and that is a massively important part of the learning. But now everybody went online. We all went online rapidly to say, well, how can we deliver this? And that suddenly things that we maybe for years said, oh, how can we do this? We're all doing. So what will our students expect? Will our students expect that there will be more delivered online? How flexible and how mobile can we be? We're doing exams online that in the past were not done, but how are they? But then you come to an area where I don't know much about, but it's an interesting one. We have to really, I think every business is doing that at the moment, and so we're trying to establish what the new normal is going to be for accommodation, but it's going to be a tough one because we don't really know how the response is going to be, how many students are willing to come back, how many people say, well, no, I actually enjoyed that online learning, or new studies that come out, and people say, well, what's going to happen? So I don't know what the new normal is. I mean, if I would know the new normal, then I probably would make I'm not as a consultant and selling my services to people who want to learn from me what the new normal is, but it's going to be really agile. And I think Ronald used to know was resilient as well. We said, well, we're able to respond to what's going to come and what the market is demanding, because the market will tell us in some ways what we need to do.
Yeah, what I hear from you is you sort of rely on the students' common sense a lot too. I mean, it's the same in the community we live in, right? When people go on buses or on trains, or we just rely on people common sense, and I think hygiene is like a massive important thing. It's always been. And now for heaps of people have realized, like, oh, it is indeed that important for us to wash our hands or to sneeze in our elbows, or, you start teaching your children from a very young age. So do you think, apart from that, there'll be long-lasting effects within the student accommodation? Will there be, for example, I don't know, like renovations to accommodate, or...
Yeah, it's a very good question, because I think it's one of those things that we, especially in the very beginning, when we had to deal with the initial cases, that you say, or the initial cases you start looking at it, you say, well, how well is my accommodation suited for this? Like I said, well, really, when you think about it, the ideal circumstance is an individual room with its own bathroom and its own kitchen facilities, and probably wider corridors and this and the other, and surfaces that can be easily maintained and cleaned and whatever. So I think, but at the same time, if you've got, like we've got 2,000 beds, and you've got a fair number of beds that are in that kind of accommodation type that shares certain facilities, it's going to be an extremely costly and time-consuming exercise to make changes. But it's going to be interesting to see how new facilities that are at the moment on the drawing board, how they respond to it, because I think it's highly likely that students will vote with their feet and will look for that one. They will look, because this is not the first pandemic that we've had. It's probably one of the worst ones in numbers and the way it's spread, but I think it's likely that there will be more, and I think we need to be better prepared. So I think we will look at how we can do it and how we best use it. And some of it might be relatively small changes, where you can say, well, if we do this, then that looks after it and can do it. But other ones will be very structural changes that you're probably better off almost to pull a building down and put a new building up.
It's probably, I was just thinking, it's probably not a bad thing that the borders are not open at this stage. So it gives you a bit of time to think about what to adjust and what to look forward to when they stagger and come into, when the borders reopen and the students exit the country again.
It is. It was in the early days. It was when they were thinking, "Oh, it's going to be open again." There was a lot more stress on how, because we didn't know all that much. So this you never knew. Now at least the university is now like maybe we're in that kind of how can we recover? How can we reopen? And you've got a certain amount of time to talk about it and think about it and use that knowledge that is there. I think universities, I think in a lot of cases, are relatively conservative and careful in that approach. I think that this university is fully aware that the safety and well-being of staff and students is foremost of importance to us. So we are a lot more inclined to take it, if we can, to take it a bit slower, to get to that reopening and recovery. And reopening is always a bit of a funny one because we've been going on. I mean, the university doesn't shut down, so it is bringing back on campus more. I think they are very, very careful not to go too quick. And again, you come to the fact that you can talk to major infectious diseases specialists and talk about it. Well, what do you think, and how would this work, and what could be the issue that we face here? So but it probably also makes you a bit more scared of what can happen. And I think that's probably why we're probably a bit slower. But then again, at the end of the day, you get dictated by the market. Once people start rolling faster and it starts going faster and the demand comes back and say, well, we want to come back on campus, you're going to have to start responding to it more quickly maybe. But at the moment, we've got that little bit of a window to really, and the planning hasn't stopped and the work on it hasn't stopped. So it's good to have that breather, like you suggested. Some cases sometimes don't open the borders too quickly, but in a proper way, in a responsible way.
That sort of bridges to one of our other members. Turko had a question on, I just read it out. What is your view on further growth potential for the international education sector in Australia, both in terms of capacity at universities and available accommodation, or more broadly, infrastructure?
It's a big question. Not surprised coming from somebody from Bouwenvest, actually. I had a quick look at their things, and I think they've got some student accommodation pipeline in Amsterdam. It's an interesting one because I think when you look at, and again, I want to stress that some of the things I say here are apparently very much what I see or what I've experienced, and not the position of the university or of UNSW as such, because I can't speak for them. But I mean, having been in the industry, I think that you clearly see that there are universities that are struggling in general too, especially regional universities find it hard. But do we now see maybe that regional universities will become more attractive again? Because for people saying, well, actually, fact, why would I want to travel to the big smoke and everything that's going on there, when actually, fact, I can study here at a good university in my own environment, where I know it's a lot more secure and safe, because there's been a lot less chance of those kind of incidents happening. So I think there will be those challenges. I think there's how that's going to work out. Again, universities are quite reliant on international students. So how is the international market going to respond at the moment? I think I was looking at some data that come out from either the government on visas and deferments, or from other entities on kind of the sentiment. At the moment, the sentiment is that there's probably still largely people still want to come once this is over. Enrollment numbers seem to be not dropping as much as maybe people had feared.
Okay.
So you've got that aspect. I think there will still be an expectation, and maybe the next couple of years will be, when I'm looking at the numbers that they expect that next year will be probably stronger domestic. This was a report from, was it Savills, saying, well, we expect that maybe next year will be stronger for domestic in comparison because internationals will be maybe slightly hesitant. At the same time, I mean, when they talk about the overseas, Australia seems to have jumped a bit from sentiment on the pecking order because they say, well, they're looking at it and say, well, actually, in fact, we're normally speaking in competition with the US, the UK, and Canada as the main ones. Well, you're looking at their scenarios of especially the US and the UK in how they've been impacted by coronavirus. And Canada didn't have an easy run either. So for a lot of people, actually, in fact, Australia might be seen as a very safe destination.
Wasn't it used to be that there were waiting lists for international students? So there was always an overflow, whereas now the numbers might have lowered, but that doesn't mean that you can't accommodate them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's always been a high demand for international students for accommodation. They like that in general. They like the security of either accommodation on campus, especially, or accommodation that is closely affiliated to a university. And then you start looking at the new big providers of student accommodation that you see when you go in town, the Igloos and Urban Nest, what we call purpose-built student accommodation. They seem to be very attractive because it gives people, especially, and just think about it, when you send your 18-year-old son or daughter from, where it may be, from China or Vietnam or India, you send them to Australia to study, you want to make sure that they're safe and secure, and those facilities provide that. So there was always that high demand. I think next year will probably maybe a bit tighter. We say, well, okay, well, we still expect high occupancies, but you probably not have this list of people that you can pick from when somebody cancels and say, well, don't worry, I've got another 100 or 200 or 300 sitting on the waiting list. It might well be that it's going to be a bit tighter. So the interesting part, because I was thinking about what you said from Jacques' question, I think it's also very much dependent on the city where you are. I think looking at the three major cities in Australia in regards to student accommodation and for universities, Brisbane at once had a major drive for building student accommodation. I think they probably will have an issue of oversupply. They already had it a bit because they built so much. And in the pecking order, it's probably the third city after Melbourne and Sydney. And then I will upset the Sydney people, but probably for international student, Melbourne is probably still the #1 destination as a city.
Yeah.
And they've got a lot as well, but they've got campuses that are in the middle of the city. You've got University of Melbourne and RMIT are mainly smack bang in the middle of the city. So you get all those buildings that attract residents from students from different universities. Sydney has struggled in that the fact that it was a lot more beneficial to put a residential development down than a student accommodation development because the financial returns for the developer were much greater on that residential development. But that's why in our environment near us in Waterloo and Zetland and Alexandria, you've got all these residential towers, but and we've got a shortage of supply of accommodation, which probably now might be a bit more beneficial because the demand will probably still, or the supply will now be maybe better matched to the demand for the next years. So it's going to be, but Sydney needs to grow a bit more in accommodation provision for students.
Okay, we'll let Jacques know.
There's still that demand. People look for those big universities like UNSW, Sydney, University of Sydney, Melbourne, what they call the group of 8, the sandstones or whatever you call it, or the brownstone, the special ones, that the 8 top universities in Australia. That's what people will go for. So they're in those cities, and we will still attract them. Maybe a bit less, but there will still be I think a healthy interest for them.
Yeah, so we're looking into still a positive future, I guess. I'm just conscious about the time, Ron. We only have a few minutes left. So you mentioned earlier that it's your very first day back into your office at UNSW. Has there been any affections in your personal life, or I'm hoping you and the family have all been well?
No, thanks for that one. No, it's an interesting one because normally speaking, I've been this person, you go to the office, I would normally speaking drop my wife off at her workplace and sometimes my daughter. So you spend this long commute in the morning, you spend this long commute in the afternoon to get back home. And the university was very quick and said, well, encouraging people to work from home. So suddenly, while I find it strange, because I always said I'm not a from home worker. I need that interaction in the office with people and being able to go around and see people. But once you get put in a position that you need to do it, actually, in fact, it suddenly meant, well, okay, I can go for a nice walk in the morning, stretch my legs and whatever. I probably worked harder because I've got less distractions, in the sense that when in the office you say, okay, I'm going to see these people, and you wander up campus and it's a 5-10 minute walk to get there. You talk to people, you catch people on the way back, you grab a coffee and whatever, and before you know it, an hour has passed by. Whereas at home, you pick up the phone and you call somebody, you speak for them for 5 minutes, and you carry on. And so on that side, it has meant that probably a better work-life balance. I can have once it's more easy switch off and say, well, okay, that's it. I've done my time. I've got what I need to do. But at the same time, it's been probably busier than ever because that continuous changing environment made sure that there were always new questions and new scenarios to review. But it's been nice for some time. And I definitely think that after this one, we'll say, well, okay, how do we deal with our commute into work? Maybe we should just go a bit later, maybe work an hour or so or 2 hours in the morning from home and then jump in the car and have a quick commute. Or say, well, I'm going to work maybe 1 or 2 days a week from home when it suits and do it that way. Because I think everybody is now used to the fact that, well, you dial somebody into a meeting. If you're not there, you dial them in, and why not? That's possible.
Yeah,
it was always seemed a bit difficult.
Yeah, I think it's adjusting to the new normal for us as well. It's not only in business life, but it's in personal life. It's everywhere. And indeed, these Zoom meetings, I hadn't heard from. I think I had 2 before COVID situation started, and now it's like I think my most used app on my laptop. I think I've been on Zoom, and I have to say I appreciate face-to-face interviews or face-to-face conversations as well. But so you get away from your computer for a bit. But yeah, it was very lovely talking to you. Sorry.
No. I think the last comment down that was that when I picked up my phone yesterday, I needed to call my wife quickly. I was doing some show. I had to scroll so far down to find a mobile number because now they were all office numbers. When in the past, like that was the number that mostly appeared on my mobile phone because you would talk to people, you would go and see them. So it was quite this funny thing. I had to scroll down there. Where is it? So it's that thing. But yeah, no, it's been a pleasure from my side as well. I hope you and the people who watch this later on get something out of it that enlightens a bit more on what we're doing and the challenges we've been facing. And I'm now looking forward to joining Dutchlink and being more part of it. It's been.
We'll hope to see you soon at one of our events. That would be great.
I'm looking forward to it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ron.